This is Ideas Worth Exploring by Mark McDonald.
In my free time, when I'm not writing science podcasts, I like to read books and browse the internet to learn new things. And one of the topics I've been interested in recently is investing, the idea that if you have money, then you can use it to make more money. This is a really important topic that I wish my past self had understood better, and so I'm going to break the usual rule of only doing science so that I can dive into this other thing that interests me, which is figuring out what the evidence says is the best way to invest money. According to a recent survey, the top 5 careers of millionaires in the US are engineer, accountant, manager, lawyer, and school teacher, which is kind of surprising. Teachers have an income that's just barely above the national average, so it looks like the secret to being a millionaire isn't just to make a lot of money. There must be more to it. And so, after spending time researching the best ways to handle money, I've found that the real secret to getting rich is to do two things: live like a millionaire and invest like a millionaire. The first part, living like a millionaire, is also called living below your means. It turns out that the majority of millionaires in the US live on a budget, drive a used vehicle, use a written grocery list when shopping, and consider themselves frugal spenders. There are also some lavish spenders who earn enough income to support that lifestyle, but the actual majority of people with a 7-figure net worth got there by being frugal spenders. To talk about this millionaire lifestyle, I'm going to touch on a couple ideas in personal finance, like budgeting and creating an emergency fund, because you can't really invest money if you aren't already in a stable financial situation. After that, we'll talk about the second part, investing like a millionaire, which means to invest in boring investments, like low-cost index funds, and then not touching it until you retire. We'll also discuss taxes, dart-throwing monkeys, and why dead people make the best investors. Part 1. Living like a millionaire. The first part is simple in theory. Instead of spending your money, you don't spend it. Yeah, I know. When most people say they want to be rich, this isn't what they mean. What, why would you even want money if you don't spend it? Here are my top 4 reasons. 1. Interest. It earns you more money in the long run. 2. Financial security. It makes recovering from unexpected events much easier. 3. Financial independence. I'd really like the option to retire early and travel the world, but you need savings to do that. And 4. Legacy. I really care about donating to philanthropy to make the world a better place. So, assuming you have one of these goals, how do you go about not spending money? One option is to attach a low voltage shock device to your wallet so that it zaps you every time you open it. Or you could just do normal things like buying less stuff on Amazon. But to figure out what you can do to start saving, you need information, and that comes from tracking your expenses. When I was a Boy Scout, to get one of the merit badges, I had to track expenses and follow a budget for 6 months. But I was like 12 years old, so my only income was $10 from pulling weeds for my neighbor, and my only expense was $2 worth of candy from the dollar store. But since $10 is greater than $2, that was considered a success. As an adult, it would be a lot more work to write down every time I buy something. But luckily, modern technology has my back. I have an app on my phone that looks at each transaction I make and puts them in a category, like bills or groceries. I've been using the one called Rocket Money, though I've heard there are other good ones out there too. And honestly, this helped us realize that we were spending way too much on eating out, and noticing that saved us maybe a couple $100 this year. So I really would recommend using an expense tracking app. Another part of getting our finances in order was building a 6-month emergency fund. My wife and I have our emergency fund split between our checking accounts and a high-yield savings account. A high-yield savings account is an account at an online-only bank that earns high interest. Even though it's online only, it's still insured by the government just like a normal bank, so there's no worry about losing your money if it goes out of business. These high-yield savings accounts are giving over 4% interest right now, so for every $10,000 in the account, you earn an extra $400 a year, which might even be enough to stay ahead of inflation. Being deliberate about finding a savings account that gives good interest is another thing I would really recommend. Finally, there are 2 main ways to take advantage of these tax buckets: an IRA, or individual retirement account, and an employer-sponsored plan like a 401k. I'm going to call these two different flavors of buckets. I don't know why a bucket would need a flavor, but oh well. First, the IRA. And I'm not talking about the Irish Republican Army. I'm talking about an individual retirement account. You agree that if you withdraw the money before you turn 59 and a half, you'll have to pay a penalty. But if you don't withdraw it until that age, then you get to take advantage of the special tax buckets. There's a limit to how much you can put in an IRA each year. This year the limit is $7,000. It can feel pretty nice to get the full $7,000 in, but if you can't manage that, then it's still really great to put in whatever you can afford. The next one is the 401k. It's a type of account that you can only use if your employer offers it, but if they do, then it's another way to take advantage of these special tax buckets. There's also a second perk to the 401k. Many employers will match some of the money you put in, which is the closest thing to free money you'll ever see. In fact, many sources recommend that you go for the employer match to your 401k even before paying off credit card debt. It's just that good of a deal. So that's how you can use the Roth or traditional tax buckets. I also want to talk about the taxable bucket for a minute. One reason I put off investing at first was because I wasn't ready to lock up my money in a retirement account, and I was worried that if I put it in a taxable account, then I would lose money when it came to time to do my taxes. So let's talk for a minute about how this money is taxed, so that you won't be worried about that. First of all, investment income is only taxed when you sell. Until then, it's called unrealized capital gains. It's like you're telling the IRS, oh, I didn't realize it actually gained any money, so that's why I didn't pay any taxes. Except that it's actually what you're supposed to do. So if you buy and hold, you could go for years without having to pay taxes on your interest, with the exception of dividends, which are taxed in the year you earn them. And if you lose money when you sell your investments, then you can subtract that amount from your income, so you pay less total tax that year. But when you do sell the stock and realize the gains, that's where the interesting tax law happens. Because how much you pay depends on how long you've held the fund. If you've held it for less than a year, you pay the same amount that you'd pay in ordinary income tax. But if you've held it for more than a year, then you get a super special tax discount. It's called the long-term capital gains rate, and it's generally much lower than the tax rate on your ordinary income. The long-term capital gains rate feels like a giant tax loophole that ought to be patched, but I've recently seen good arguments that it makes sense to keep a low long-term capital gains rate, so I'm going to reluctantly believe it. But as long as this advantage tax rate exists, you might as well take advantage of it by holding on to your investments for at least a year before selling, because that gives you the lower tax rate. If you really think the government will do a better job of deciding what to do with your money than you can, then feel free to donate it back using the website pay.gov, and it will go to reducing the national debt. But there really are better things to do with your money. Part 6. Logistical questions. Okay, it's finally time to answer the practical question. What do you actually physically do to invest? Like, do you have to travel to New York and walk into the stock exchange on Wall Street? And the answer to that one is no. You do not have to walk into the stock exchange on Wall Street, and you actually can't do that because it's not open to the public. But what you can do is open an account online with a broker and have them buy the stock for you, and it only takes about 10 minutes. The big three names in stockbrokers in the US are Vanguard, Fidelity, and Schwab, though there are plenty of others out there too. Just Google the name of the broker you want and open an account. It's not all that important which one you go with, but if you're stuck in analysis paralysis and need help choosing one, I've heard some really good things about Fidelity. After making an account with a broker, you'll have 3 more choices to make: the bucket, the vehicle, and the ticker. First, the bucket. You can choose between a taxable account, a Roth IRA, or a traditional IRA. If you're saving for retirement, choose one of the IRAs. Otherwise, choose the taxable account. Also, if you want to use a 401k, that's set up by your employer, so you can't open one on your own. But these next steps will still apply to that one too. Second, the vehicle. Mutual funds or ETFs. These are both ways to do index funds. They just have slightly different rules. For long-term investors, the difference doesn't really matter, but target date funds are typically a type of mutual fund, so that's where you'll go to find them. Third, the ticker. Stocks, ETFs, and mutual funds can be identified by a scramble of letters called the ticker symbol. For target date funds, I found it easiest to find the ticker symbol by Googling the words target date fund plus the broker and year I want. For ETFs, it took some research to find the good ones, but here are some of them I've used before. VU or VTI or VT for broad market exposure to stocks, with the difference being if you want just the top US companies or all US companies or all publicly traded companies around the globe. For bonds, I like the ticker symbol BND, bond. If I want something zero risk, I'll either use my high yield savings account or go with short-term government bonds using the ticker symbol SGOV, SGOV. There are other ETFs that work just as well. These are just some of them I've used before. I've also been looking into a new one with ticker ESGV, which holds broad market exposure to US stocks, except without any alcohol or tobacco or fossil fuel or weapon companies, as a way to do more socially responsible investing. Fourth, well, actually, you could be done now. Once you find the ticker symbol you want, you can specify how many dollars to put into it, and voila, you're invested. But if you're saving enough money every month for it, then you might want to set up automatic investments. By getting rid of as many decisions as possible, you have fewer places to make mistakes, and forgetting to invest is one of those mistakes. So setting up automatic investments is a really good idea. And then, once you've put the money in, you leave it there and let the interest compound. If you invest $1,000 every month into an index fund and assume that the fund makes an average yearly return of 5% after adjusting for inflation, which is very reasonable, then after 33 years, you'll have $1 million in today's money. But less than half of that is the money you put in. The rest is interest. You more than doubled your money. And if you get a higher interest rate, or if you keep it in longer, or if you can contribute extra earlier on, then more and more of the money is from compound interest. It's money that you only have because you invested. Albert Einstein once said that compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. He who understands it earns it, and he who doesn't pays it. So avoid debt and start investing early, and this will make your life more interesting. Part 7. Giving back. Once you're well established and feel like you've got a good hold on your finances, there's one more step that I want to encourage: giving back. You see, the world's got problems. Poverty, food insecurity, disease, climate change, factory farming. And the way the world matches solutions to problems is by using money. We actually have the capability to solve almost all of these problems if we just had enough money going to the right places. And the amount of money we need is about 10%. If everyone who made more than $60,000 a year would donate 10% of their income, it would be enough money to end world hunger, give universal access to clean water, eliminate the world's big three diseases of tuberculosis, AIDS, and malaria, and still have plenty of money to spare for hundreds of other projects. By the way, if you earn over $60,000 a year after tax, then that puts you in the top 1% of income earners globally. So yeah, donations can be powerful, and the global community has settled on 10% as an amount that could transform the world without being a huge hardship on the person donating. So I would encourage anyone who's on the path of successful investing to join this emerging global trend and donate 10% of their earnings to charity. But if you decide to do this, one big thing to keep in mind is that some charities are more effective than others. When people do research on which charity to donate to, one of the things they tend to look at is overhead, or the amount of money that goes to running a charity's operations versus going to the people in need. They believe that high administrative costs make charities ineffective. But research shows that this isn't the case. It's called the overhead myth. Nonprofits actually do need to hire competent staff if they want to do a good job, and that takes overhead. So no, most of the actual difference in effectiveness isn't from overhead, It's from the type of intervention the charity performs. For example, you can train a seeing eye dog for $40,000 and help one blind person in need. Or you can take the same $40,000 and use it to pay for 100 trachoma or cataract surgeries to prevent people from going blind in the first place. That's 100 times more people, or 50 times more if you count the dog as a person. I said before that an employer match on your 401k is free money, but a 100 times return on investment completely blows that out of the water. And this is a pretty common trend in nonprofit work. The most effective interventions are regularly 100 times more effective than the average charity manages to do. I actually consider this to be one of the most important ideas I've encountered in the last decade, that cost effectiveness can be applied to doing good in the world to have huge returns. One problem with this is that it's hard to figure out how effective a charity is. What you really need is randomized controlled trials that give you data on how much of a positive effect the charities are actually having in the world, and it can be hard to find that information. At this point, I would usually say something like, luckily, capitalism has you covered. But in this case, I think the problem is actually solved by people trying to do good in the world, rather than people trying to make money. So that's a welcome change. Charity evaluator organizations employ people whose full-time job is to research which charities are the best at converting your money into lives saved, or diseases cured, or whatever metric they use to determine impact based on data and evidence. GiveWell, Giving What We Can, and The Life You Can Save are all organizations that recommend charities based on impact and effectiveness. There are also other evaluators like Charity Navigator, but they're still too focused on areas that are easily quantifiable, like the overhead myth thing. And while Charity Navigator specifically is slowly adding data on impact and measurement, until they get a little further along with it, I'd recommend using one that does measure impact. I personally donate money to the GiveWell Top Charities Fund, which takes their recommendations for the most impactful charities and splits your money between them as needed, sort of like an index fund for charities. But you can also just look at their recommendations and choose the one you like the best. Not everything in life has to be an index fund. I know different people have different goals for their money, but if one of my main goals is being able to make a positive difference in the world. So if you have similar goals to me, then hopefully this information on effective giving can help you meet those goals. Part 8. Learning more. It can be really easy to make mistakes with your money, but if you learn from the best, then you can avoid many of those mistakes. So here are some of the best resources I've found on investing and personal finance. First, the Bogleheads. Jack Bogle was the founder of the Vanguard investment platform, and he was a strong proponent of broad market, low-cost index funds. People who follow his advice are called Bogleheads, and they're some of the most financially savvy people I know. So Bogleheads.org and the Bogleheads subreddit are both excellent places for investing information. The Boglehead Wiki is an especially good resource to read through for new investors. Actually, when I'm Googling some financial question I have, I often add the word Boglehead to the search query, and it usually improves the quality of the answers. While we're talking Reddit, the Personal Finance subreddit is another good place for personal finance information. They have a good wiki too. But other than those two, Bogleheads and Personal Finance, please don't take financial advice from anywhere else on Reddit. That's generally a bad idea. In the blogosphere, Mr. Money Mustache is really good. He's one of the focal points for the FIRE movement, which stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. It's all about saving hard and investing enough money early on so that you have the option to retire at 40, or whenever you're ready. On the other hand, Bogleheads tend to not be quite as frugal, so they can retire comfortably at 60, and both are valid lifestyle choices. Books can be a little hit or miss, but here are some of the good ones that I've heard recommended over and over again. I recently read The Millionaire Next Door. It's really good at explaining how the average rich person tends to be frugal, but it's kind of old, and so its investing advice is a little out of date. 3 more that I have on my soon-to-read list are The Simple Path to Wealth, The Psychology of Money, and The Little Book of Common Sense Investing. Some good sources on effective giving include the GiveWell website, the Effective Altruism Forum, and the books Doing Good Better and The Most Good You Can Do. Finally, some sources to be careful of. Anyone who tells you to invest in individual stocks is not giving you good advice. Anything that is pressuring you to act quickly or that time is running out is probably a scam. And also, be careful of taking advice from anyone who will make money off of you using their services. They might not have their interests aligned with yours. Not to say that they're going to be dishonest, but just that they could encourage you towards actively traded funds instead of the index funds that the evidence points to as being best. Summary. In summary, we talked about how living like a millionaire means living below your means so that you can put money into savings every month. Then we talked about how a wise investor invests in index funds with 3 properties. First, the right mix of stocks and bonds to match your risk tolerance and time horizon. Second, well-diversified funds that cover the whole market instead of just individual sectors. And third, a low expense ratio. One really easy way to do this is by putting your money in a target date index fund. By doing this, you will more often than not be better than the dart-throwing monkeys, stock pickers, and actively managed accounts. Then, you can invest like a dead person using the buy and hold strategy. Make sure to take advantage of the different tax buckets for retirement accounts. And finally, if your goal is to give back to the world, then learn about how effective giving and evidence-based donation strategies can multiply the impact of your donations by 100 times. And there it is. This strategy of buying and holding index funds isn't guaranteed to be the best you can do with your money, but it is very close to the best you can reliably do with your money in a world full of risk and uncertainty. In my world of engineering, this is called robust optimization. You're not just trying to make the most money, you're trying to do it while minimizing the chance that unexpected events will knock you off course, which is why the simple rule of buying and holding low-cost broad market index funds is such a winner. It doesn't leave a lot of room for mistakes. One last point. At the very beginning, I talked about becoming a millionaire. But you might argue that being a millionaire isn't what it used to be, and having $1 million doesn't make you rich anymore. I think that's just an issue of drawing boundaries. Whether you draw the line at 1 million or 3 million or whatever, I'd rather have the money than not. And so, for such a simple and low-effort strategy of buying and holding index funds, it is definitely worth the effort of learning the basics of personal finance and investing. Time for one last joke. Pretty soon, you'll be investing in stocks. Beef stock, chicken stock, and vegetable stock. And if you do it right, then pretty soon you'll be a bullionaire. Or, if you're more risk averse, you can convert all your money to pennies. It just makes a lot of sense. Whatever you do, I hope you manage to meet your financial goals and that it helps you to live a more fulfilling life. Thanks for listening to this episode. Come back next time to get back to actual science. Peace.
This has been Ideas Worth Exploring by Mark McDonald.